On episode 254 of the Tennis Files podcast, you'll learn how to get the best performance out of your racket with Allan Iverson. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Tennis Files podcast. This is Mehrban, and today we have an episode with Allan Iverson, who is a Babolat sales representative for all of Southern California. He's not the former NBA player. I know that Allan probably gets this all the time and is probably sick of it, but I had to throw that out there because I do like corny jokes. But Allan is also a USPTA P1 with more than 2 decades of teaching experience. He has been Babolat's National Salesperson of the Year, and he has had over 25 years teaching experience and running pro shops, and he was the 2014 Tennis Industry Sales Rep of the Year. So it's always fantastic to speak with Allan. I've had him on my previous summits and on the podcast a couple times. And in this episode, we talk about how to choose the best tennis equipment for your game based on the latest trends and technologies. So we talk about rackets, strings, and other equipment that will increase your comfort and feel on the court so that you can reach the next level in your tennis game. So I hope you really enjoy it. And without further ado, here is my interview with Allan Iverson. Hey everybody, welcome to this session. I'm really excited to speak with my friend Allan Iverson from Babolat. We've had Allan on several times during the event, and if you probably remember last year, we went for over an hour and a half and just had to cut the session up because there were so many questions from you all. So today's session is slightly different. It's more of an interview format with me, but I do have a bunch of questions from the audience that I solicited beforehand. So I'm excited to ask those questions as well. But just to let you know about Allan, he's a Babolat sales representative for all of Southern California. He's also been honored as the 2014 Tennis Industry Sales Rep of the Year. He's a USPTA P1 with more than 2 decades of teaching experience. He was also Babolat's National Salesperson of the Year in 2012. And he's been with Babolat for almost about 15 years now, as well as, over 25 years teaching tennis and running pro shops. And he also played number 1 in high school, and he plays a lot of tennis right now as well. So Allan, thanks so much for coming on to this session. Really appreciate your time.
Hey, well, thanks so much for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for all that you do to educate people in tennis. It's awesome.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Allan. And I can remember back to, years ago when we first connected, and it was just really cool I think I was in Safeway or Giant, and just talking to you about tennis and your passion. I really, really enjoyed it. So it's great to always have you on here. So our theme today is how to get the best performance out of your racket. So I usually approach these questions by, breaking it down before I ask like the big question, but I'll just ask you right off the bat. I mean, in general terms, I guess, how do you get the best performance out of your racket?
You really want to think of it in 3 ways. There's 3 major components to your racket. So there's the racket itself. That's your chassis to get the performance. Then there's your strings. That's the motor. And then there's your grip choice, which is the type of grip but also the grip size. All that makes a huge difference. And there's been some big changes in many more choices in head sizes and string and grips than there ever used to be. So that's what makes all this very customizable to what you like.
Yeah, and it seems like it's just such a minefield in regards to, we all love choices, but at some point it just becomes like there's so many and we need guidance, which is the whole reason why we have you on, Allan. So, how do you navigate that, all the choices, and how do you pick the right, specs on each of these different categories that you mentioned?
Well, the problem with the way tennis product is marketed is kind of like nutrition, right? Everyone has this secret diet that's going to change things for you, but it's all about talking about advantage drawback. And that's the best way to understand things, because you're figuring out the best thing for you. What your young teaching pro likes and what you like could be totally different things, because at the end of the day, this is personal. Tennis is a great sport because it's personal. And you got to find it. This is your hand at the end of the day. And so you're always working to find that best level. I mean, even Nadal just switched. He was in a 15 gauge, which is a very thick string, to a little thinner version in 16 gauge to get a little more power out of his string, a little bit more string movement, but a little less control and durability. That's the trade-off. So even the pros are fine-tuning what they do. Some guys stay very consistent. Other guys will vary what they do according to the conditions.
Yeah, that's a great point, Alan, because, basically it sounds like we should not just set it and forget it, so to speak. We should pay attention to, how we're evolving, how our game's evolving, our physicality is evolving and so forth, and, tweak and fine tune as needed. But so in terms of the racket, which obviously is one of the biggest parts here, what advice do you have in terms of, I guess, well, first off, like what types of rackets are out there, and then how should we go about categorizing and then picking the right one?
When you think about rackets break down, the power level depends on a few things: the head size, the beam width, right, and the length. So let me show an example here. So this would be, it's a little harder to see here, but this is a Babolat Pure Drive 107. So 107 stands for how big the surface is. So way back in the day, you had smaller rackets that were called mid-size that were 85 to 90 square inches. So if I get a smaller head, I get more maneuverability, more control, but less power. A bigger head like this gives me bigger power. It's actually more stable at impact, but it's harder to move. That's why a lot of your oversized rackets are bigger head size and longer to create more power, but they're lighter, so you make up for some of your maneuverability loss. Where the smaller heads, they can make those rackets heavier to give some of the power back and some of the stability. What's happened is before you only had mid or the 110 oversizes, Babolat came out with more of a mid-size, which right, when you see Rafa playing with this racket, this is the Arrow, this is a 100 square inch racket. So that's a blend of power and control that people like. So head size is one, length is one. Typically, you can get some of these mid sizes and longer length. Most of your bigger servers use an extended racket. So that goes back to Gordon Ivanovic, Michael Chang at the end of his career used it, Leighton Hewitt, Nabandian. Current guys are like Sam Querrey, Tsonga. They like the longer rackets because it's more power on serves and ground strokes, but less maneuverability. That's your trade-off. So that's what you have in the Arrow. You also see in the beam width, that's a thicker beam compared to something like this. This is a new racket for us called the Pure Strike 97 square inches. That's a thinner beam, right? And then as you get into the frame, how rounded it is, they call it elliptical, will create, this is the beam width in shape. So a squared off beam, which was traditional, create a lot of feel, a lot of flex, but not much power. This is along those lines, more of a squared beam. You're going to get a lot of feel and control, but not a lot of response. This is a little thicker than it looks. Sorry for the video, it's not really showing it as well as I'd like, but this comes to a tip like an airplane wing. That will cut the air faster, but also makes it more maneuverable. So more power. So thicker here, stiffer here because the elliptical, it moves through the air faster. That's the reason why vibration dampers have gotten more popular, because this is hollow and it makes a noise. I put a vibration dampener on it, it changes that sound, but it doesn't reduce vibration to your arm. It's changing the sound of the racket, not vibration to your arm. Arm issues are going to be more around the stringing. So that's kind of the basic things about that. It's tricky now because in rackets, you can get a 90, 95. This model I'm showing you is a 97. We just went to a Pure Strike, which is a thinner beam racket, and a 103, which is for maybe a player who wants more control, but wants a little more room. So you're understanding what you like there. What also goes with this is weight. So as I add weight, I get more power, but I get less maneuverability. Typically, your smaller heads are heavier. You had some players models that came out that did very well initially because they work great for that player, but it was a pro spec and people couldn't swing it. They hurt their arms because if I have every racket and I'm late, I'm hurting my arm. So you're trying to find the right weight for your swing. So a racket like this or the Pure Drive, we make it in 4 weights. So you're finding your weight for your swing. Understand my understanding on how rackets are made came with Babolat teaching me from what they learned by stringing for the Pro Tour for 20 years. And that was not as easy as you think, because a pro knows what they like, but not necessarily why, because it's all feel for them. They're good because they don't have to think about it. They just find the right feel and they hit it without thinking. So match point, they're hitting their shot without having to think about it because, well, they're a pro. So find the right weight, find the right head size. That's what you're finding. You're finding those elements that you like together.
Brilliant, Allan. So go ahead. Sorry.
Next, you get into string pattern, which, Babolat introduced a more open pattern. So the less strings I have, the more power I get because the strings elongate better and I get more spin, but I get less durability and control. In the US, these more open patterns are more popular. Players like us who we have from the European side, like a Dominic team, will prefer a more dense pattern for control. So that looks something like this. See how the strings are closer together? That gives me more control, better tension maintenance, and longer life to the string job because there's more strings working. That's the trade-off. In fact, strings got really open with some manufacturers, but they found that people were breaking strings too much and they had to go to a very stiff string just to keep durability.
There's a lot of different factors there. Really excited to follow up with some questions here. So first off, should all beginner players generally go, 100 square inches plus on their rackets, 104, 107-ish, or are there some, exceptions? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
A lot of it depends on swing speed. So, and some of that is athletic background. So you have a former baseball player or someone who's done a lot of athletics who swings fast, they might have a different need. So it's going to depend on your swing speed. The bigger head size is going to give you more room, but less control if you swing fast. So 100 square inches on up is typically what most people like. 98 on down is more for control, but it depends a lot around what you like swing speed wise. So if you're a fast swinger, you might prefer a smaller head size in a thinner beam width.
Gotcha. Thanks, Allan. And then in terms of the plus versions versus the regular length rackets, I know you described what characteristics they have. You have more power and people with big serves tend to use plus size rackets. But what types of players do you think should versus should not use a plus? Like, I don't know, you mentioned maneuverability. So I mean, should somebody who comes to the net a lot, like, should they be wary? Or somebody who gets jammed a lot, should they be wary? Like, what are your thoughts on the types of players who should get plus size rackets versus not?
So when we talk about plus size rackets, typically they're a 1/2 inch to 1 inch longer. And there's some variations where people do 3/4 inch or 1/4 inch, like our 107 is a 1/4 inch because it's actually a little heavier. It's about 9.9, whereas the 110 that we make is even lighter and it's a 1/2 inch longer because this is at 9.2. It's a bigger head size. There's a little bit of a sheen to it. Babolat in its model lines makes all the colors look similar. And there's some slight differences. And then we write that what kind of model it is on the racket. Pluses typically are someone who's looking for power on serve. That's the biggest deal. So all your bigger servers, so if you're looking for a little help there, that's great. Power on ground strokes the same. So if you're looking for some help on your serve and you've got the ground strokes to still swing it to hit the ground strokes, that's what you want to do. I mean, I use the plus. I like it because I like the extra help. But that being said is we sell it well, but not nearly as well as the standard length, which is easier to control.
Gotcha. And sorry, the reason why we get more power is what does the length do for us again?
It's a longer lever. So the longer lever you have, the more power you get. And the funny thing is, we had a connected racket, which was a computerized racket, was showing us where we could hit on the racket. And what we found is, with all the data we was getting from this rack, because it could tell you where you're hitting on the surface, is that the pro players for their serves and for topspin shots hit here. Flat to slice shots are hit more in the middle of the racket. They're hitting here because that's more power. That's literally longer away. And if you look at what's changed technically, back in the day, we were taught to hit kind of bent elbow close. If you watch all the players now, they're extending further away from their body. It's a longer lever, more power. Who doesn't want more power, right? We're Americans.
Yeah, very true. Very true. It's only if I'm hitting long a lot that I don't want that power as much. And then, to dig in a bit more on the beam type, the beam that I use like a 2017 Pure Aero VS, which I really enjoy. And I know there's been an updated version with a different type of beam. So, and I think the one that I use is a little more squared off. But what type of beams would you suggest for what types of players?
So beam width, so what you were using was kind of a unique blend because it's a square head with a slightly denser pattern. So 16 by 20, most open patterns are considered 16 by 19, and dense patterns are 18 by 20. Yours is a 1620. The new version of what you have looks more like this. We used to do 2 weights in it, but the Pure Aero VS was an interesting model, and Babolat for years had trouble really categorizing it because we made, our red and white line is our most controlled line. Now it's called Pure Strike, but it's a square beam, or what they call hybrid, which is where it's flat, but also rounded. So it's a blend of the two. Yours has the arrow throat, which is elliptical for power, but a square head, which is what's on this. So it's a unique blend, and it's been very popular. We still have guys on the tour using it now. Jack Sock being one of them. Felix Algerazim uses it also. We've done some thinner beam elliptical rackets, which now you see with Carlos Alcaraz. Mm-hmm. So that's this racket. In the VS line, we kind of denote it with this kind of special tinting to it. That's a thinner beam arrow. So it's a smaller head, same pattern, thinner beam in 98, little softer layup. And that's the tricky thing with rackets is we can talk about a racket and even racket stiffness, and we're talking about how stiff it is at the throat. Well, there's 14 flex points on a racket. And the manufacturer's not going to tell you where those are at. Even when I ask, and I love to ask technical questions on rackets, it's like a good cook tells you kind of, but not all the recipe. You know what I'm saying? So even the latest Pure Dry was a huge improvement for us, not just because we doubled up on vibration dampening, but they changed the layup of the racket and made it more controllable. And, it's just flying off the shelves. It was a great seller for anyway, but now it's even more controllable. But that's where a thinner beam here, smaller head. What you have is a very unique model because it was a blend of the new and the old.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And, last selfish question before we move on. I mean, do you see any similar, either that model or very similar, like, being developed in the future?
I think what Babolat's, really came into the market and changed the market for introducing more open patterns in the 100 square inch, size. The woofer system kind of created a bigger sweet spot and easy spin, but we haven't sold as well at the 98 range. And I think we're going to be doing more models along that lines. And, this Pure Strike 97 is part of it. The Pure Aero VS, especially now with the visibility that Alcaraz has given us. Holger Rune is coming up. He also uses it. We're getting a little more look that way. And you're figuring out between a 98 and 100, you're like, Allan, can that 2 square inches make a difference? Yes. Just like a half inch longer in a rack, you're like, Allan, that can't make a difference. Try them. There's definitely a difference in power. And there you go. And unfortunately for your customers, that's the chassis That's 30% of the power. Another 70% at least is in the strings. So when they demo, knowing what kind of string is in your racket in approximate tension, that's not perfect because every string after 20 hours loses a lot of tension. That's where it gets tricky.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely made the fatal mistake. I think I was just honestly a little lazy. There were a couple rackets I was demoing, different brand, and what I should have done is restrung them with my same string and tension, but I didn't. And that's something that I think people should be doing when they're demoing different rackets. But I guess one more question on rackets, perhaps, unless you had any comments on that. And then, okay, and then we'll go to strings as well, because that's obviously, like you said, so important. Swing weight, it's interesting. I remember demoing a racket, and it was really nice, amazing feel. I'm very solid, but I have kind of like a whippy game style, more like Nadal style, obviously nothing near his level, but, and that racket really actually hurt my wrist pretty bad because it had a high swing weight and it just wasn't great for me. So I was wondering if you could also give us some advice on swing weights, and then like what type of swing weights we should be targeting depending on our level and game style.
Yeah, the heavier swing weights are for the different swings, but it's tricky because now we the other aspect that we haven't talked a lot about, at least specifically, is weight. So it's not just how much the racket weighs, but where the weight is in your racket. So different manufacturers like to do that differently, just like the layup of the racket. So what Babolat does is typically on most of our rackets, as they get heavier, they get more head light. So you'll see people like, doing this in the store, where's the weight? Is it more in the handle? Is it more in the head? Whereas if I take something like this, right, you'll see a little bit of difference where the weight is. It's a little bit more head light. Whereas our performance rackets like this, we're going to make the racket a little heavier and put the weight a little more in the head. So you'll see it typically on the header card. They'll show you and on the racket itself the weight, but also if it's head light or even or head heavy. Back in the day when you had wood and metal rackets, the only way you made them more powerful was to add weight. But it's not just how much the racket weighs, but where the weight's at and how you like that. Different manufacturers like to do it differently. Babolat, as it gets heavier, you get more power, but to help a little with maneuverability, they make the racket more head light. And you're finding what you like.
Yeah, there's a lot out there, and we'll definitely talk about some specific racket models.
Weight's power. You're trying to find the heaviest racket you can still move. And you're looking at not just when you're in good position, but when you're in trouble. Weights have gotten lighter and lighter, even at the pro level, because the game's faster. And the game's faster, not just, at the pro level, it's faster at rec level. I mean, it's amazing the level of play. If you look at old films of how guys used to hit back with wood and metal rackets, it's not even close. I'm really shocked at the level of play we see now. And it's incredible, not just the power, but the touch. I mean, obviously Carlos hits a hard ball and can drop shot. I had a friend of mine years ago who loves Kyrgios, and who doesn't, because he's such a dynamic personality. And he's like, yeah, I can't wait to see him because I love his touch game. I'm like, what? Because the guy serves huge, big forehand. And then I watched him play, and obviously he's got great touch too. It's just amazing. And that's what you're trying to find, the right power blend of power in control and feel in a racket. It's not just the power, but what do you got on the control side? Because you got to be able to hurt people, but you also have to defend or hurt them with touch.
Mm-hmm. How do you find that right blend of power, feel, control, touch?
Well, so let's switch over to demo process.
Okay.
Part of that process is when you're demoing rackets, play people you normally play with. Because you might be hitting with this racket, think you're really doing great, and they're like, there's no difference. Or they're like, yeah, you're hitting harder, it's spinning more. I notice when and you're saying what you can do when you're in position, but also when you're in trouble, ask the right questions. You want to be curious, understand the factors you're working with, and kind of work that through. But trust yourself in the demo process, because you might take a racket out that your pro likes, your friends like, and you hit it, and within the first 5 minutes, you don't like it. Well, put it away. Try something else. Just understand the factors you're working with. And there you go. Most of the shops you go in are going to ask you what you're using now and give you something similar. But if you got to understand what you're looking for when you go in. Hey, I really like my racket, but I'm looking for more control, or I'm looking for more power. Be clear about what you're looking for.
Gotcha, Alan. And actually, I guess one more question, which kind of is a segue to strings, but for the string pattern on the racket, what's your advice for, if a player, let's say, plays with a lot of spin and that's their strength? I mean, would you advise that they get a racket that with a string pattern that even further accentuates that trait, or would you recommend that maybe they go the other way and go 18-20 for more control if they already have a lot of spin in their game? What are your thoughts there?
I mean, the denser pattern is really about control and durability, which it's hard for us to understand because we live in the US. Most of the courts in the US, especially where I'm from, because I'm in Southern Cal, we don't have a lot of clay courts, right? But most of the tennis courts in the world are clay. It's hard for us to understand. Now, Florida, you get that more, you see that. But, so for clay court, the grit from the ball, from the clay that gets on the ball, wears the strings out faster. So they like it that way. And then just for general control. For us in the US, typically we prefer more open pattern because we're getting more spin and power. And that's what we like. I mean, we've got slower hard courts, but we don't have to contend with clay and what it does to our strings. So typically we like a more open pattern, but it's really the level of control you're looking for. If I go denser, I get more control. But if I go more open, I'm going to get more power and spin. The US, typically we vote for number 2. We want power and spin.
Gotcha, Alan. And I guess, it's kind of tough with all the factors you mentioned. I mean, I'm trying to formulate a question basically asking you, like, if we want, should we go for the racket to be, if we want like a spinny, a racket that produces a lot of spin, should we make like the racket the primary focus of whether spin is achieved, or should it be the strings? How do you mix those together?
It's both, right? And what's really changed the game is polyester strings.
Yeah.
And so this is that poly question. Your 20, 25-year-old teaching pro loves polyester strings. They don't break. They give him spin. He doesn't have to restring a lot. And it's added a kind of a different level of customization. So an example of that string, this is string in a reel, right? You can also buy it in a pack like this. A lot of times you don't even buy it. If I break strings a lot, I'll buy a reel because it's less expensive for me. The same thing when I buy grips, if I really go through a lot of grips, I might buy something like this over against a smaller looking pack like that. So this is a polyester string. And what's weird is polyester strings give me more spin because they slip better with the ball. They've got a higher burn rate, so they last longer. So I get spin, I get control, I get durability with it, but it's not an elastic material. Now, what they've done is made this stiff material softer. So they talk about more powerful polyesters, but that's not really the main benefit. So, you get a lot of people going into polyester strings because, a lot of expert players like it, but it's very hard on the arm. In fact, Babolat's working on another multi-filament because, all poly is really meant for someone who breaks strings in 8 hours, which is not a lot of the market, which means there's a lot of people in polyester. Maybe it's not the right choice, or they got to find the softest choice, right? This is an example of RPM rough, which, gives more spin. It also gives a color option. This comes in different colors, a red and a black. And you'll find even with the different colors, this color is actually softer than the red color just because the dye changes things for polys. So polyester string has made these mid-power rackets more controllable. So that changed tennis. Pete Sampras called polyester strings cheating because back in the day, you had synthetic materials, you had Pro Blend, which was a very stiff material in the main in a synthetic cross that was very stiff. In fact, Agassi used only that material both ways, but just because he's looking for control. And when polyester came popular with Quercetin and then Agassi, they really switched to that string. So that before that, we only had softer strings and gut. So Bjorn Borg, Pete Sampras, they all had to string their rackets super tight to get control, because tighter is control, looser is more power. Now you're finding that guys are stringing poly loose to get more spin, but they're not losing that much control because it's not a powerful material.
And I guess some of the audience may wonder, what's the difference between me using a poly at a normal tension or using synthetic or, natural gut with like a really tight, tighter tension? Well, what would be the difference there?
When you're looking at your stringing, is you're looking at what the material does for you. So a multi-filament will, after about 20 hours, it's going to lose, 15 to 20% of its, tension. Gut's 5 to 10%. Any polyester loses 50% of its tension after 20 hours. But, why am I getting that? If I get gut, that's going to be the most elastic, most powerful string, for my game. And since it holds tension well, playability over a lifetime is going to be great. So typically gut comes in a package like this because it's a natural material, right? It actually comes from a cow. It takes about a month to make. It's an intestine and a half of a cow. It's a very interesting process because you've got to strip the intestine and clean it and process it and twist it and dry it. And how I coat it makes a difference. This is the most powerful material. So pros at the pro level, they're getting, they might use this and blend it with a polyester string, and it's kind of half-half. I was talking to Julian Lee, who runs the string for the BMP tournament and strings for Yonex at Australian Open. He's a pro stringer, longtime pro stringer. He's like, guys are blending, and it's kind of 55 to 45 if they blend with gut and a poly, or they're going polys typically loose. So I go to this because I want power and I want playability over lifetime. I'm going to go to a poly because I want something that's going to give me spin, control, and durability. I'm going to go to a multi-filament. This is our version called Excel. A multi-filament is about comfort, it's about power, and it's about feel. This is going to give me a bigger sweet spot, give me good tension maintenance. It's going to be easier on my arm, but this is a power and comfort story where, the most popular selling string in all of tennis is RPM Blast. This is about spin and control. In fact, our marketing is so key. A lot of people think that this is what the name of the string, but it's actually here, RPM Blast. It's spin and control. So whereas you go to Excel, that's going to be more about comfort and power. That's your trade-off. And if I hybrid those, like we do an RPM Power, which is a softer string with the Excel, that hybrid can give me a combination of the benefits. Like, when we did our symposium last year, this was the main caveat, right? Because people had a lot of questions on multi-filaments about hybrids, because the multi-filament maybe not enough control, polyester a little too hard. If I blend them, I can get a mix of that, right? And I can we sell RPM with VS gut because that's even a more upgrade into that hybrid region.
Fantastic stuff. So as far as the hybrid, then, would you suggest if somebody's playing with full poly and then they're either having arm issues or they just want a more comfortable ride and maybe even they want some more power, to then switch to trying out that hybrid format?
Yeah, the hybrid's going to give them, make it easier on their arm. Spin quality is good, but they won't have as much control, but they'll have more power and be easier on their arm. Durability will be less because the poly has more durability. It's a higher burn rate. It's just a more durable material in general, right? So you can kind of see it a little bit here. When you get this is the gut. You see it's starting to fray. I'm not sure if it's showing well on video, but this is gut main poly cross. Whatever I put here is the main playing element. So gut elongates well and it slips well with poly. So I still get good spin, but I'm getting the power I want. If I put gut here, I get more power with good spin. If I flip it and I put the poly here and gut here, I get more durability, I get more control, but I get a little less power, a little less feel. So that's my trade-off. So elastic materials give me power and feel, but less spin and durability. Polyester is the opposite. If I go to something like a syn gut, that's really a value option, right? It's less expensive, still plays well, but it doesn't play nearly as well as a multi-filament or even next level gut in terms of feel and power and softness.
Got it. So it seems like syn gut, like you said, good value option, and then next step up, multi-filament, and then I guess if you have maybe deeper pockets, then you want to do natural gut.
Yeah, it's all about playability a lifetime. I mean, natural gut, we've added different coatings to it. You just don't want to be playing with wet tennis balls because it will affect that material, right? So it depends, partly it's going to depend on the region and what kind of conditions you play in. Natural gut's still a good choice if you keep your strings a while, because tension maintenance being so much better, playability over a lifetime is better. If you're harder on strings, it just depends what you can afford in that. You're really going from 22 on up for a synthetic. When you get into multis, you're 30 to 40. When you're getting a gut, now you're around 60, 65, depending on it. So that's kind of the general ballpark. That's the jump ups you see. Hybrid strings is somewhere in that, $30 to $45 category. So that could be a blend for you too.
Got it. Thanks, Allan. And so we have obviously many different demographics. So I'm trying to pick one that's pretty popular here and then try to see what you think. So let's say if we have, let's say a 50-year-old player who is like a 3-5 or 4-0, and, they play a lot of doubles, and they do, have the financial means to, buy, top quality strings. And, they don't play like too spinny. They're probably maybe average as far as that. They come to the net a lot. Like, what type of string would you recommend that they get?
Well, I mean, the bias really for me is, Babolat is the oldest tennis company because a year into tennis, they were making gut for violins and for surgical stuff. And the guy came to him because literally steel wire was what they were putting in the rackets. So gut was where it all started. Gut is great, but gut is using gut is a little bit like when I take my wife to a good restaurant. Do you know what I tell her? Don't get used to it. Because there's nothing that plays like it, right? So, right. And the difficult thing of when we talk about product and all that, we're defining sensation. I can only get you close to what you like. But what you like, I mean, part of the process is you've got to be willing to try different things and burn a few string jobs, because the stringing is the key. And if you watch the pros about how picky they are about the stringing, that's the key. The racket's the chassis, but the motor is definitely the strings. I mean, Babolat is the top string manufacturer. I mean, the problem is, making some of these strings isn't really that expensive to make. So, I mean, if you go on like Tennis Warehouse and you look how many string brands there are, it is mind numbing. I mean, there's like over 100. So it's really tricky. And so they're all trying to tell you that this is the latest and the greatest, and you got to have this. It's really tricky. And, even as we get into shape, you're going to guys telling you there's an edge to our string, so it gives you, more spin. It doesn't, right? It's really, we create RPM where it has 8-sided, but they're rounded for more slipping. It's very, very tricky about discerning what you like.
Yeah, definitely. And then how about, I think we might have got this question last time as well, but like in terms of varying up the tensions on the mains and the crosses, I mean, first off, do a lot of pros do that? And then do you think that's something that amateurs should do or try out?
I've heard different, on the Babolat side, they're like on hybrids, don't make it more complicated. So keep it the same tension. Now, again, talking to Julian Lee, I asked him a lot of questions because he's really the pro expert at the highest level. He's like, Allan, a lot of times, the crosses go a little less. It used to be because the crank stringing machines would feel the tension differently because it's on a spring load. Now they're on electric machines, most of them. So that doesn't affect that. But he was telling me, Alan, a lot of times your cross strings aren't as long as your main strings. So people do tend to go down a couple pounds. It just depends what you're looking for. You're going to get a more responsive string bed from that. Is that what you want? So if you go a little looser on that cross, now you got more power, but can you control it? You know, his point was a lot of the pros have that swing to control it, but you might not be able to control that, Alan. That was his point to me, but that's okay. I didn't cry too hard, but you know, that's the difference, right? So it's all, again, why I liked his presentation, because it's not like, hey, everyone should do this. This is advantage drawback. If I do a little looser on my crosses, I'm going to get a different type of string bed. Did I like that? Same thing, you know, transitioning, you can actually pre-stretch strings. That means is, let's say I want a racket at 60 pounds, just to pick a number, not that that's the perfect tension. If I pre-stretch that 10% on these electric machines, it will go up to 66 pounds and then come back down to 60. What that means is my strings will hold tension longer. So I did that with some polyester strings, and I found that I did not like the string job literally for weeks because it stayed tighter so much longer. I was used to losing tension, and I didn't like it. So part of your process as you try strings is just on your phone, write down a little notes, how you liked it day 1, how you liked it day 7, and you're kind of refining your sensation. If you can do it right after you play, it's great. You put it on your phone. That way, when you go back, you've got some questions about string performance at the beginning and through the lifetime of your string, so you see what you like.
Got it, Alan. And some questions about pre-stretching. First off, what is the actual like process of that? Like, how do you pre-stretch a string?
You can do it 2 ways. So the old school way is you wrap it around a pole and you pull it. Like a lot of times that was what was done for gut, just to make it easier to string. Now on the machines itself, there's a tension head that moves back and forth that will stretch to, you know, let's say, 10% more, and then come back down to the tension you asked it for. And that's going to help, reduce some of the tension loss to the string. That's why you do it. So some pros ask for it. A lot of them don't, but some do. And that's your benefit. You're going to get a string that will lose less tension over lifetime. So if you're going to do that, you got to just be aware of initial tension and how much tension loss you like.
Got it. And just curious, do you know if tennis shops charge for the pre-stretching?
They do not.
Okay.
They have to have the right machine. What you're looking at and what you want to be aware of is electronic machines string about 10% tighter, because when you're undoing the clamp, the electronics machine is still pulling, whereas a crank machine will stop, you clamp it. It's not pulling when you're changing that string out. So, a lot of shops like a crank stringer because it's less expensive. It's easier to string on, but it doesn't string as tight and maybe even as accurately, depending how I crank. There's a couple pounds different. Some people crank a little faster, a little slower, there's a little difference there. But that's just how sensitive you are to pressure, right? As I go up in tension, I gain control, but less power. Lower tension is more power. You're trying to find that right resting rate. And you're trying to figure out how you like your string at the beginning, and then, 3 or 4 weeks later, a couple of months later, depending how long your strings last. Pros are finding their right tension right away because they're going to use that racket for 30 to 40 minutes. And then they change it typically with the ball changes, which is something that Lindell started back in the day, because they actually are so hard on balls that, every ball change makes a difference. That's why you see the players always showing you that, hey, I got a new ball now. So the guy knows or girl knows who they're serving to, this is going to come a little faster. But that's why they're changing out their rackets. And they usually carry 6 to 8 rackets, depending on the pro. And when they're done with it, part of the job of someone at the tournament is they're done with that racket, it goes back and it gets restrung during the match.
Gotcha, Alan. I know we haven't mentioned nylon, but I'm just want to ask real quick. Is that, I mean, should that just not even be considered by anybody, or should anybody actually use nylon?
Nylon's a great value story, right? I mean, as you're starting out, it's a great value story. If you can afford something more, but nylons play well. But, as you go to multi-filaments, you'll get a little more elasticity, a little more power. Part of it really just depends on your level of interest, right? So value is really how much you use it. You're not playing a lot. You play once every couple of weeks. You just want a good value story in your racket. You're still figuring out if you like it. Great. Let's go nylon, right? Because they call it synthetic gut, but that's a good way to start. If you're getting more serious, you want to take it up a notch, then you can go to multi-filament. If you're finding that you're looking for more control, or you're starting to break strings a little too frequently, then you can start to hybrid. If you find you need a little more spin and control and your arm can handle it, you got to be careful there, you can go to polyester string. If you're looking really, if you've got a tennis elbow issue or an arm issue, gut's the best way to go, because it's going to be the softest, most elastic material on your arm.
Gotcha, Alan. And then I guess another choice is, I mean, some string brands have like a soft version of the polyester. So, I mean, if you're a polyester player, I mean, do you want to try that soft version first before like a monofilament or a hybrid setup?
Yeah, I mean, the softer, you're making a stiffer material softer. So polyester is the big push, is to make it softer, right? So we just recently came out with RPM Soft, right? Which is an even softer polyester for maybe someone transitioning into poly. This would be a good start. You go up to RPM Rough. This is not quite as soft, but it gives me more spin, more control, a little more stability. When I go all the way up to, RPM Blast, this is the most control and spin, depending on my racket. Polys also give you some different color options, which is somewhat about soft, but it's just about personalizing your racket, just because you might just like another color better than another, just because it's a style choice. So softer polys definitely, but understand you're making a stiffer material softer. So make sure your arm can handle the stiffness of that material. And if you try it and your arm hurts, cut it out, because it's not going to get any better, and consider hybrid.
Thanks, Alan. And then I know you mentioned a third big element is the grip. So can you kind of educate us about the grip and why that's so important?
So a couple of things you got to think about with grip. Now, different, back in the day, you had only this type of grip. So this is a leather grip, okay? Leather grips fit very tightly to the racket. So my feel for where the grip is even better with leather. It also adds weight. So this is a player's racket. So we added some weight. They get better feel. Typically, you don't see people using all leather anymore. It might be underneath to add weight and add better feel, but it's less padding. So, this is an over grip. You can see, I don't know if you see the seam so well on the video, but I wrap this on top of it. So that is a lot of times we'll go over that leather grip to give me some of the feel, but also better gripping on the racket. So within that, you also have, synthetic grips, which, sorry, this is a new racket, but you can see there's no seams on this. That's a synthetic grip. That has more cushioning to it. Most of your rackets come with synthetic grips because they're way easier on your arm. If you haven't played with a leather grip and you play with a leather grip and you don't put a wrap on it, you'll for sure get a blister because it slips more. It's a slippery surface. This has more cushioning to it. What Babolat does that's, interesting is, we were talking about this one earlier. The grip on this is a synthetic grip also, but we call it a Syntec team. It has less padding to it, so you get more feel. All my demos, I put an overwrap on just because it makes it easier to change it out and keep it clean. But, you're looking at the type of material, leather grip, if you want to get leather because you want the weight and the feel. I would recommend putting an overgrip on it, right? And as you get into overgrips, you got different choices. Like for us, this is Pro Tour. All grips will have something like this on so you can feel it. In our market, we typically like something tacky. I mean, the funny thing about this is a white overgrip. White overgrips are a terrible choice because the dirt from your hand and the oils from your hand are going to get on this. Yonex started this because their tackiest grip was white and their most sweat absorption grip was black. But people really liked white grips, so manufacturers started copying, and that's why we have white overgrips, which really make no sense because they get dirty, but that's why we have them. But you have other colors, right? You know, you can do blues and things like that. Turner grip's very popular in the market because it makes a very sweat absorption grip that is felt like that sweat absorbs. So this is our Pro Tour kind of version of that. You know, Tour Original version of that. This has silk powder in it, but it's about sweat absorption. So I'm figuring out what grip do I like? Do I want something that's tacky because I like tacky? Do I live in a really humid climate where I need something that's sweat absorption? For us, Pro Tour is somewhere in between that. Even in overgrips, this is called Cinta Evo. And again, I apologize if I'm not coming through well on video. This is a replacement grip. So it goes on the handle of the racket before the overgrip. That this is perforated because that helps you with some of that sweat absorption idea that you're looking for. It dries quicker because there's holes in the surface. So all rackets will come with certain grip on it. You know, most of our rackets come with a Syntec Pro, which is a padded grip. On our Pure Strike line, which is more of a player's racket because it's a thinner beam, we make the grip itself actually a little thinner so you can get better feel. So thicker grip, more comfort, more, a little bit just ease of gripping. Thinner grip, more feel, more control, you could say, but a little harsher, right? Because I have less dampening to it. Over grips are what I do to keep some of the tackiness to my grip because the oils from my hand are going to make that grip slip over a while. And what you're noticing, you might just start out with your regular grip. So you start out with your regular replacement grip that's underneath here. If you start to see tears in that grip, please replace the grip, right? So this is the tire to your car, right? If you watch performance car videos, they're always talking about what type of tires on there. That compound makes a difference, right? So replace your, if your replacement grip wears out, if you only like that feel, which is I prefer that. I don't really like the ridges to an overgrip. I just replace the replacement grip. The overgrips go on top of it. They'll make your grip a little bigger, but they provide better tackiness and you can keep it going more regularly. Same thing too, when you go in, look at the top. This is called the bumper guard, right? In the package, it looks something like this. You never want to put these on yourself. It's a nightmare. Have your stringer do it. But look at the top of your racket. If you're starting to wear into that guard and it starts to wear into the frame, your frame could break and the manufacturer will not replace it. And it's ruining the integrity of the structure, i.e. the stiffness of your racket will go away. Pay attention to this because your stringer might miss it. So look at the top of your racket and see the wear. If you start to wear into the guard, replace the guard. And you have to do that when you string it because the strings go through the guard when they do it. They have to put the guard on after they take the strings out before they string it.
Great stuff, Allan. Yeah, I've kind of laughed inside when you said not to replace it yourself because it definitely is a pain. I've done it a few times for my Piero VS 2017, but it's not easy for sure. And yeah, I mean, you're totally correct because there have been some instances where, in the many years ago when I was more naive, I didn't have a replacement overgrip with me and my grip of the racket was not comfortable. It was slippery or whatnot. And, you're restricted. You can't really swing freely and confidently. And so, it's something that's pretty small, and very cost effective to change, but can make an immense difference. And also depending on the type of feel that you like, that can make a huge difference as well. So would you say, I mean, for the majority of players, would you recommend that they go the route of just using the grip that comes with the racket and just replacing that with a replacement grip? Or would you recommend that more players go the overgrip route? Because I think I've seen from what I've observed, not a huge sample size, but a decent one, is I feel like most players who are playing tournaments and whatnot, they're using overgrips and taking those off when needed and replacing them.
I would recommend more the overgrips, right? Just because then you can keep your surface tacky or as sweat absorption as possible, or a mix in between. You're figuring out, it just depends how much your hand sweats, right? If it doesn't sweat a lot, and you might like tacky. If it sweats a lot, you're going to look at something with sweat absorption. And this is why we're having this conversation, because it's all personal what you like. I can't tell you that. I can just tell you what's offered, right? So the overgrip is the way to go, and really pay attention to what that looks like. And it's just part of you being the best prepared you can be for your matches. Brad Gilbert wrote a great book, called Winning Ugly. I recommend it. And it's fantastic. And if you ever watched Brad play, you would know how true that was. He got to 4 in the world though, with that great game. And he talked about preparing your tennis bag. So you got to have your racket right. You got to have your grips right, your stringing right, whatever else you need in there nutritionally, or change of clothes, all that. And the better that you're prepared, the better you're going to feel and more confident going into your match. That all, translates into you hopefully winning more, because, winning is a whole lot better than losing, by the way. That's why we keep score.
That's right. Definitely correct. Definitely correct. And then I guess just to double check, with the perforated grip, I mean, is that like kind of a medium ground where, like, instead of using a tacky grip, a regular one, or the, sweat absorption one, like a corner grip style, or the one that you brought up? I mean, is that like a middle ground then?
It's a combination of sweat absorption and tackiness. Okay. Whereas, a felt like type grip is going to be all about sweat absorption, not as much on the tacky. Our Pro Tour grip has some of those qualities where it's tacky and absorbent, but absorbent is absorbent at the end of the day. It's the material itself being, having some type of sweat absorption material in it that helps. And you just got to be willing to change that out. If you're in a humid region, you might be using 2 or 3 rackets just because you sweated through the racket, right? And you just be willing to change. That's the value, of that. And what you'll see, players who break strings a lot, or who want to change might change during a match. They change with the balls, but at the recreational level, you might change during a match if you sweat through the grip and you don't have time to change it out.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And so as far as the, modifying the racket, I mean, we talked about the bumper guard, but like adding lead tape and other materials on there, do you have any recommendations for players who want to, again, get the best out of their rackets, like on like how they should go about adding any other things like lead tape or putty inside the handle and things like that?
The first thing you want, let's say you find a racket you like. Understand these rackets aren't like they're all handmade. So there's some spec differences in the racket, weight and balance. So if you find a racket you really like, if you can, what they call racket match it, bring that racket to someone who customizes and have them do it. All the pros are having their rackets sent to a customizer who customize their rackets and basically racket matches it to their spec. So that's A. So racket matching is first. If you want to customize your own, that gets tricky because, where you put the weight changes where, how it performs. So I have a racket like this. If I add weight right at the tip, I get more swing through, right? But, that's overall power. This gives me power. If I want power and a little more stability, I go here. They call it 11-1. If I go racket here, this is even more control because I'm at 3-9. This is about stability. If I put weight here, this is going to give me overall mass, i.e. power, just because it's mass, but not as much swing through. If I put weight in the handle, and what they do is all your rackets now, since they're all tubular, like we talked about earlier, there's what's called the butt cap. This plate actually comes off. So if there's any debris in it, I can shake it out. This is where they add silicone to the handle. The problem is if you add the silicone, you add too much. Now you got a problem. If I put weight here, I get more maneuverability to the racket head, not necessarily power. It's more about maneuverability. So this is power, this is maneuverability, and then where I put in between. If you can work with someone who does racket customization, that would be great. I mean, the one area I find surprising that people don't do more, if I have 2 or more rackets, find the one you like best and have them racket matched. You just want as consistent a feel as you can. So that would be my recommendation. You talked earlier about, getting the swing weight right, where the weight is, the weight can be the same, but how it swings can even vary. So getting someone who does that work, incredibly helpful.
Thanks, Allan. So one other question on that is like, scenario is that, let's say we want to retain the racket's properties of, of the spin and like the same power and control, but we want to just add more stability to the racket. Where would you recommend we modify the racket?
Right here, 3 and 9.
Okay, 3 and 9.
Even this racket, we kind of extended, which was unique for Babolat. We extended this bumper guard down a little further. And this as our ultimate player stick was to add more weight, i.e. stability to the racket head. Wilson back in there used to have a primer weighting system that was a notch here, but basically it was weight on the side of the racket. So that's what you're looking for, at 3 and 9, you'll feel that. And do it incrementally, right? It's interesting, customization's changed a lot. Because back in the day, if you saw Jimmy Connors or Pete Sampras' racket, you would see lead tape all around here. Literally, they put lead tape all around it. And you know what Pete Sampras or Connors could swing isn't what we can swing because, Pete Sampras, served at an incredible level and his shoulder never fell off, which is incredible to me. But he liked a very heavy, small-headed racket. He was just incredible. But the weight was here and you saw the lead tape. Now they'll inject it into the racket or put it under the bumper guard. So you don't see the customization as much, but the pros do it.
Gotcha. Thanks, Allan. So I'm going to scroll through some other questions here. This is a very general one from Michael, but he asks, how do you know you have the best racket for you?
Well, you got to figure out what you're looking for, right? So it's all about chassis, engine, and then grip or tires, right? So make sure you find the head size you're comfortable with, 100 square inch works well for a lot of people, but if you're swinging slower, you might prefer a bigger head for more power. If you got a really fast swing and your 100's not controlled enough, go into a smaller head size for more control. Length would be another caveat if you want to add power to your serve and ground strokes. String, you got to decide, am I looking for comfort and margin and tension maintenance and playability over lifetime? I go to a multi-filament, a syn gut, or actual natural gut. If I'm looking for more spin and control, now I add the polyester to it. And this is why the demo process is so tricky, because if you get a racket with polyester and you use multi-filaments, there you go. When I go bring my demos out for BMP, because I have a demo court during the BMP tournament next to the tent, which is cool. They asked me bring one with a multi-filament, one with polyester, so people can better determine it. And some of your pro shops and online buying will give you that option. Know what you're asking. And then, going into grip, make sure you get, you have the right grip, a good grip on there that's not worn out. This grip, you can see it's starting to get discolored. It's time to change this grip, right? It's dirty, right? Don't be overly cost conscious on something that's so important to your hand. So if it gets dirty, starts to get worn, change it out. So find the right, head size, find the right string and string tension. Higher tensions give you more control, lower tensions not. You might find the right string, but find that after a couple of weeks, you're not getting enough control. Next time you string it tighter. Or it's too much control for too long. Next time you string it looser. So you're finding that right blend, and then you're finding the right grip for your hand, right? So you're looking here and trying something that fits your hand right. What's changed so much in grip size? So we're talking about the circumference of the grip. Back in the day, they used to sell 3/4 square inches grips. I mean, my buddies used to build their grips super huge. Now you got Nadal and Federer using quarter grip sizes, and they're 6'1". They're a lot bigger than you even know because you're seeing them on TV. They're taller than you think because the stroke mechanics are changed and people are turning the racket over more. Smaller grips are more popular. And if you decide you want to try a smaller grip, let your arm get used to it. Don't just go that one grip because you're used to gripping a certain way and then you change it. You're going to hurt your arm if you don't make that change.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Sorry, my watch is talking to me. It's an Apple. So that's what you want to look at is find your right grip. And everyone thinks this is standard. All manufacturers are different. If I get a Prince racket, the grip is round. Most head rackets have a rectangular shape, except for some of their speed line, which is more around Djokovic. Wilson and Babolat, it's more of a square grip. So where the bevels are and what they look like will change by manufacturer. Babolat grips tend to run a little bigger. So you might be a 3/8 in another manufacturer, but in Babolat, you'll be a quarter. You got to go and feel the grip and have your, who's ever measuring your hand or, pro shop you're working with, look and see how it fits your hand. You don't know what you know, but you're aware of that feel. Even as you demo this process, trust your instincts. Just, we're having this conversation so you understand what the parameters are, so you can figure out what you like best, because at the end of the day, this game is very personal, and find out what you like. And that will change over time as you develop, right? I'm sure, right? Even as you working with your game, you've tried different things, and it's good to experiment. I mean, even when I was interesting talking to Babolat about their product development, because they're really product developers, and innovation is a big thing for them. I would ask, hey, what if you develop something and no one likes it? Well, they're like, well, we throw it away and we start again. We had a connected racket. It was called the Play Racket. Nadal and Wozniacki used it, and they were one in the world at the same time. We're so fortunate to have them, but we didn't sell a lot. People really weren't looking for that connected product, but it did help us, like we talked about earlier, with our development of other things. So as you experiment, you might figure out what you like, but you also figure out what you don't like, and there's nothing wrong with that. Be willing, if you experiment with a string and it's not quite working out, or it's hurting your arm, or you don't get the control or the power you want, be willing to cut it out. It's a worthwhile investment in something that you really enjoy doing.
Yeah, experimentation is so important in life in general, as well as tennis. So definitely want to try things out and see what works for you. Another question, which, we did kind of cover before, but it does have, a part to it that maybe we didn't specifically cover. So this one's from Trevor, and he asks, when doing a hybrid string job, should you vary the tension between mains and crosses? And if so, what's a good rule of thumb?
I think it's easiest to keep it simple, and just the same tension for both. If you do lighten the tension on the crosses, see how you like it, because it's going to make a more dynamic string bed, i.e. a little harder to control, but a little more powerful. So to see that's the parameters you're working with, that you want to play around with and see how you like it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. And then in terms of, so I guess another question's from Vinny here. Will Babolat ever come out with a frame like the Pure Storm Plus from around 2011-ish?
So Pure Storm Plus is kind of a version of this Pure Strike VS I just showed you. That was a 98 extended length. We had great use in Europe for that racket, but it was a thin beam, longer racket. So it's a unique blend because you got a little bit more pop, but you still got the flex of a traditional beam. So you got a little more pop on the serve and the ground strokes, but it was a little easier to control because it was a softer beam. Extended lengths for Babolat, we're one of the few manufacturers still do it in a mid-size racket. and you'll see it in the Pure Drive and the Pure Arrow. He used to make even a heavier version called the Racquet when he played, because he's an extended length racket, but he liked it stiffer and heavier because that was his spec. And we sold it well until he decided to retire, and then not so good. So not likely, just because when we had, at least on the US side, we didn't sell it that well, because I sold that in and it didn't move as well. But it was a really cool playing racket because of that unique blend.
Yeah, for sure. So we have Heidi here, who I've played mixed doubles with actually, and she asks, how many hours of use will I have to sacrifice if I start doing a hybrid of natural gut and multi-filament versus multi-filament and poly, since the strings will pop sooner with the natural gut?
It's going to vary to person, right? And so that's tough, but this really relates back to be your own tester, right? Start to write, if you want to write it on a notepad or on your phone, the string experts I talk to, right? And my string knowledge really comes from them. The one guy, Lucien, who, strung out 60 Grand Slam tournaments, over 600 pro tournaments, was part of that group for 20 years that strung with the Pro Tour for Babolat. And we still string at pro events and do that. This is, you got to figure it out what you like. And this is where you measure it. That's why doing some note taking, you figure out not only durability, right? That's one aspect, but playability. How do I like it week 1, week 2, week 3? Because that's going to help you adjust tension or materials.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it seems like, like you mentioned, it depends, but I guess the common element here in both setups is multi-filament, but then instead of the natural gut, you're replacing with poly, or comparing them. You would think that the poly probably will last like a substantial amount.
Well, if you
time.
go, well, hybrid is a poly and something softer. Could be synthetic gut, could be a multi-filament, could be gut itself. If you put the poly in the main, you'll get more durability with it. If you flip it and put the multi or softer material there, you'll get more playability, but less durability. So there you go. I mean, the other, nuance, you get some people taking a poly and putting a stiffer poly with a softer poly cross, which would be an even more sophisticated blend if you wanted to soften up your poly a little bit and go that direction, but gain a little more spin and durability.
Gotcha. Good stuff. So I have a question here from Luis. I'm trying to interpret it properly because the question was 2 strings versus 1 string, any difference? And my first thought is I'm wondering if he's asking about, 2-piece stringing versus 1-piece stringing. I don't know if you have any other interpretations of that, Allan.
It was fascinating, and really what, when we did our last time together, and thank you again so much for letting me be on this, I was shocked and fascinated, right? Because, I only have my limited understanding of this market. We had so many questions on hybrid stringing. That was, when you say 70% easy on that, it's really because of the caveat. Like, people like multi-filaments, but they want something that will give them more spin and control. So a softer polyester or a hybrid system helps to accomplish that without going to an all poly that is, they find too harsh or too hard on their arm. Now, in terms of stringing, what you're going to find is, this, you can see, if you see 4 knots, see the knot, the knot up here, that is because it's 2-piece. That has a lot to do with where the mains dead end. So if my mains dead end or stop at the bottom, so I string the mains first. If I stop here, I don't necessarily want to keep it 1 piece, because if I do and I go up, now I'm hard on the tip of the racket, because the hardest thing you do to rack is to string it. So a 2-piece system, a lot of times work for that. Stringers don't like it because I do lose some tension on the side of the racket, on these side strings, when I tie a knot. So if I can keep it 1 piece, I have a little more uniform attention. Most of the Babolat rackets are two-piece because of that. There's some stringing methodology where they can do it around the world, and some other methods where they bring it up to the top. They don't do all the mains, and they come back down and they keep it one piece. It's just a little more complicated. So that is what you're looking at in terms of, with a hybrid system, you have to do a two-piece system or 4 knots because you're using 2 materials.
Got it, Alan. So if you're doing a one piece and it happens so that, once you string the mains, then you end up stringing the crosses from the bottom of the throat area going up. Is that okay? Is that less stressful on the racket? And is that still allowable in your mind?
It's more stressful on the racket. So most of your United States Racket Stringers Association, really goes against that because it's just harder on the racket. It's a little bit better for tension maintenance. It's a little easier for the stringer to do it, and it saves a little bit on strain, but it's harder on the racket. In terms of, to kind of caveat into this, the hardest thing you do to your racket, unless you throw it on the ground and break it or hit it on the ground, is, which we see some of our pros doing that, not that I recommend this,
fortunately,
is string it, because you got uneven pressure on the racket when you string it. So even I string the mains first on the racket. What I want to do is string a couple on each side at a time, 2 to 3, because that way I'm not creating uneven blend. So if I go all the way here, now this side starts to lopside because there's no tension under it. And this is also when you're stringing an electronic stringer is better because it has tension mounts not only here, but also on the sides of the racket. So that helps the racket support it as you're putting unequal pressure on it when you string it. So I string the mains first, and then hopefully I go this way down because I'm going towards the stronger part of the racket when I go here. This is the least supported part of the racket. So if you go up this way, I'm putting more pressure, particularly here on the racket when I go up.
I see. So is it okay to do a one piece if if you start the other way, if it ends up being that way instead?
At the top down, from the tip down, they call this the tip down to the throat. So this is still the racket head. This is the tip. This is the throat. So if I work my way down this way with the crosses, that's best for the racket.
Okay. Gotcha.
If I go one piece up, if I've got what they call a 10-point mounting system, which you see on most electronic stringers, it's a little easier just because it's a better supported racket when you string it.
Gotcha. Excellent stuff. Excellent, Alan. I'm trying to think what else. But as far as Babolat's offerings, just want to ask you, I know that you mentioned the pure, was it the Pure Strike VS? That's right, that you just showed. But a little while ago with the red trim. Are there any other new releases for coming this year that you can actually talk about, or any, recent ones, either on the rackets or string side, or anything else you want to mention?
Well, we're, RPM Soft was a new release to us. We also did RPM Power, which is what Dominic Team is in, which, what they're trying to do, what's trending in polyester strings is they heat the material up. So that heat process is now longer, and then it gets pushed or extruded through a die hole. So longer heat process, less tension when they pull the string through the die hole, making the material softer. And then we put a coating on it to make it have a little more of a crisper sound, because we're finding that people like that. So that's a softer poly string, but we're still softening up a stiffer material. So that's what's trending on the poly side, making them softer. Color choices are more of a color preference choice, but it does affect the softness of the string. So string wise, you'll see that. Babolat will be coming out to LA probably sometime May, June to test a new multi-filament, because, I've been at different symposiums where we have Lucien come out and speak to the tennis pros about not having every one string polyester strings, but talking about advantage, drawback to different string materials, and what materials for who. We're used to the American way, which it's one thing for everybody. We promote this one thing, it's the latest, greatest, but you're figuring out what you like, right? And what we haven't talked about within that is gauge. So it's weird in gauge because a 15 gauge is actually thickest, and an 18 or 19 gauge is thinnest because it's a plumber's measurement. So it's how many strings can fit within a certain circumference. So a thinner gauge is actually higher. So in a polyester, if you're not breaking a lot and you want something softer, you could go to a 17 gauge. We even do an 18 gauge in RPM. We don't go to the 19 gauges like some of the manufacturers because we felt like we were just splitting hairs at that point, because do you really need a durable material that thin? But you'll see some of that. So understand material in gauge when you talk about it. So we, 17 gauge in European speak, it's in millimeters. 1.3 is 16, 1.25 is 17. So, look at gauge too as you talk with your stringers, understand those variables. You should, if you're trying a poly or you're mixing a hybrid with a poly and a multi-filament, do a thinner poly 17 gauge with a thicker multi 16 gauge, because the poly will still outlast in most cases the multi-filament.
That's a great point. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Alan. So I guess that's an interesting question. So I think you talked about kind of the profit margin on strings, but I guess we got a question. I don't know that you necessarily have to answer like what, because the question is, what is the profit margin on strings versus rackets? I mean, I don't know if you don't necessarily have to mention like the exact numbers, but another way of asking it too, if you'd prefer not to, is like, is there a bigger profit margin on strings versus rackets?
Well, it's way bigger on strings. That's why you have so many string manufacturers, because it doesn't cost a lot to make it. You can, batch make it, bring it over, and it's bigger on strings, right? It's how you control that process. Babolat really is a manufacturer product versus having people make it for you. We make our strings in Germany, which most good polys are made there, and then we finish it in Babolat. Excel and Addiction, which are multi-filaments, they're made in Lyon, France, which is where the company's headquartered. We make it in Plurimel because that's where the cows are. Literally, we go there and got to clean the intestine and do that. It's a very fragrant process. I've been to the gut factory. You got to literally throw your clothes away. But it's definitely a different process. So, that's where it's different. And rackets are tough because, most of them are made in China. Yonex makes in Japan because they're a Japanese company. So they make their own rackets there. Most other manufacturers buy time in manufacturers in China. And I've been fortunate to be over there. And so you got to find that builder, buy your time, and then make sure you get the right builders building to your recipe, right? Because you got to lay up the graphite in certain ways to those 14 flex points we've talked about. And then they get, they lay up the graphite fibers on different sheets, put it in a mold, and then they inject the mold with air and heat it in a mold that you give them, right? So it's a very hands-on process. A lot of hands touch, your racket before you get it. Same thing with footwear. You'd be surprised how many hands touch it before you get it. String is a little less complicated than that, especially on the poly side.
Gotcha, Alan. Great stuff. Where's the best place for people to follow, Babolat and check out what they have? And also say a similar question, for yourself as well, if you want to shout out any, social accounts or anywhere else that you'd like people to visit.
Babolat.com, we've got now a website where we're doing more information that way. We've got a great guy named Daniel Becker who has our marketing, where we start our own website, not really to sell material, but it's just to get our brand story out there a little bit more. But you've got, your local pro shop, who carries the brand. If they have good brand support, that's the guy you want to connect to, because, the internet sites can give you great reviews, and they're very helpful partners for us that do great reviews, and they try to give you a good idea of who, each individual buys. I'm this type of player or this type of player. So that's helpful. But they can't restring your racket. So as you go into these pro shops, ask the questions, and, they're going to help make it personal and help you to know your product. And it's partly up to you to, You can make this as customizable as you want, but find the right guys who have the knowledge and the interest to help you, because it's a personal process that really makes a difference. So work with your local pro shop, find reviews online. Babolat has its own information too. And your other websites that do their reviews. I mean, everyone has an opinion. So nothing personal, but not everything you see on the internet is true, though. I hate to tell you guys.
What?
I know.
Oh my gosh.
I
That's
hate
why
to say that to you. I knew you'd cry a little bit, but it's all right.
that's why things have been spiraling down lately.
No, you're killing it. Thank you for all you do.
Oh, thank you.
But that's why, I'm giving you the best understanding I have, and this is the parameters we work with, and it's cool. I mean, it just like racket grip shapes. It's so hilarious how they're all different because it's all a personal take. And it's even true, if someone tells you this is the one way to serve or hit a forehand, when I go watch these guys play, and I was fortunate to watch some amazing matches, and we've got such amazing players playing right now, I just can't believe it. No one hits the ball the same way. That's what's so cool about tennis. I mean, that's what I love. And then same thing for product. It, fits a lot of different needs and styles.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. And, glad you all have Alcaraz in your corner. I mean, it's just incredible.
He's incredible. But the cool thing about him, he's like, hey, I'm not Nadal, I'm Alcaraz. I mean, certainly makes great shots, but he plays a little different game. And it's weird, like we talked about, these guys who can hit with such tremendous power, and then he hits a drop shot. I'm like, what is going on here? It's incredible. And no one really talks about what a great server is, but he's a great server too. I mean, serves 120, 130. It's incredible what we are able to see out there. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. As you probably saw, they had stats that, Alcaraz at 18 is serving bigger than, most pros on tour on average. So it's very, very impressive. And I'm sure some of that has to do with the racket and the strings and whatnot.
Well, I mean, the racket makes a difference. I mean, we've seen a huge uptake in people who want that pure LVS, and that's great. And these, Babolat's fortunate to have such great ambassadors because we're really a 5th generation family owned company. It's not a big corporation like some of the people we compete against. We're really innovators and makers of the product, but we've been fortunate to get some great brand representation for not only themselves and our company, but the sport. I mean, Carlos is one of those. Obviously, Rafa Nadal and his graciousness in winning or losing, and he's amazing. I mean, Felix is great. I mean, Layla talking about 9/11, and she's Canadian, at US Open. Unbelievable. I just, Muguruza, Kim Clijsters over the years. Roddick was incredible for us. I mean, Carlos Moya, really, who's now Nadal's coach. It's been an amazing story for us with these amazing amount of players. And I'm not mentioning all the players. It's just what I'm thinking on top of my head right now. We've been fortunate in having such great people to be with us. Jack Sokoff, he's very dynamic. He just, won in doubles at BNP with John Isner, and I watched them play. That was incredible. And we've been lucky.
Yeah. It's we're all lucky to see the great tennis there, and tennis, evolve over time. And then how about your socials? I mean, Allan, don't you have a Instagram?
Yeah, I'm on
or any other?
Instagram. I'm in Instagram.
Okay.
I'm trying to do that better. I need your help. Like we'll have to talk about after this. And
Sure.
I'm still learning that process, but definitely you'll see more on my Instagram on that under A. Iverson. So look at that, and I'll definitely be showing more on product there.
Brilliant. Great stuff, Allan. And then as we kind of talked about, if you attend some of the live streams, we'll potentially be giving out some cool Babolat stuff. So that would be great.
Absolutely.
So definitely, would want you to attend those. And I guess we'll close with just asking you, for one key piece of advice to help players get the most out of their racket.
Trust your instincts. Be curious. Try different things, try stuff that you wouldn't try. And you're figuring out what you like and what you don't like. No one can tell you this. This is why we went through the variables of racket and racket head size and racket length and racket weight. And we didn't even talk a lot about racket stiffness, but you'll feel that when you hit it. Understand when you demo what string material you like to use, if you're at that sophistication level. But if not, at least ask what's in it, right? Hey, what demo do you have? What's in it? And then figure out what grip material you like and what grip size works for you. These are all the parameters that you're walking through that make a huge difference. Don't use your boyfriend's racket who's a 3/8 and you're an 1/8. He won't like it. Find it, make it personal, customize it to you. And part of when you go in and talk to rackets to your pro shop, they're going to ask you your tolerance in terms of how much you want to pay. So there's rackets at the different price levels from 100 to 150 to 160, all the way up to now we're in the 200s to 280s. You got to figure out what you want to spend and then build from there. Your local pro shop's going to have more of the premium product. Your sporting goods will start you more entry level because that's a less sophisticated buyer. But if you can buy through a local pro shop or a more high-end retailer, it helps you, just because if you want to refine that process over time, they're going to know you and know the process.
There you go, everybody. So with that, Allan, thanks a lot for coming on the event, and I really appreciate your time, and obviously looking forward to chatting soon. And obviously I want everybody to check out Babolat's products, and they make some top quality stuff. I play with, as I said, their equipment as well. So it's really, really fun to have you on, Allan, and looking forward to chatting again soon.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me on.
Anytime. Thanks, Allan.
Bye.
All right. I really hope that you enjoyed my interview with Allan Iverson and got a lot of value out of it in terms of how to get the best performance out of your racket. And if you do enjoy the podcast and get value from it, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a review for the Tennis Files podcast. And you can do that at tennisfiles.com/Apple Podcasts with an S at the end, or in your favorite podcast app of choice that you use to listen to the show. Would really appreciate that. I would also like to leave you with a quote, as I often do at the end of the show, and this one is by Mary Kay Ash, and Mary said, "Even the smallest achievements pave a way to great success." Definitely want to improve just a little bit at a time. As they often say, if you improve 1% every day for a year, you'll have improved 37 times your original performance. So definitely, every small achievement is not to be overlooked. It's to be celebrated and built upon. All right, with that, thanks so much for listening to this episode, and I'm looking forward to putting out more episodes for you to benefit from. With that, I bid you adieu, and this is mehrban, your host, signing out.